Republican Senator Rob Portman, who also served as U.S. Trade Representative under President George W. Bush. Senator, thanks for being here today.
Becky, thanks for having me on.
What do you think about what Scott was just telling us?
Well, it would be terrible for the economy, and as you said, about $1 billion of trade across the border every day. So we do need to be sure that we keep the ports of entry open. The president's point is a good one, though. There is a crisis at the border. We have 4,000 people a day now being apprehended. Mostly it's families and a lot of kids. So we do need to change some laws, which would be much more effective than shutting down the ports of entry. The problem with shutting.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, the problem with shutting down the ports of entry is people will tend to come in other places, not just the ports of entry. And so, it would disrupt commerce, but I don't think it would solve the immigration crisis.
My understanding is that a lot of this crush of people who are coming across at this point, coming across the border and applying for some sort of asylum on this, are coming in through the ports of entry anyway. So what would be the correct way of trying to address that?
Yeah. We need to change the laws. Right now, people from Central America, primarily the Northern Triangle countries, see an advantage that coming to the United States because we don't have the capability to be able to detain people. And under law, we can't for more than 20 days when there are children involved, so families or unaccompanied kids. And so they are allowed to go into the community pending a hearing. And a lot of those folks don't show up at the hearing. And those that do, I think the number that get asylum is about 10%. So there are ways to deal with it. Mexico is starting a pilot program, which has been very helpful. I met with the Secretary of DHS last week on this, where they're actually allowing people to come back into Mexico pending the hearings. That seems to have a positive impact because folks that have a legitimate asylum claim tend to be sticking around, and those that don't tend to go back home or perhaps staying in Mexico. But so there's some solutions here that are short term, but the longer term solution is to come up with immigration reform.
I think about immigration reform possibly being able to make its way through Congress and through the Senate at this point, and it's hard to imagine that could work. Is there any behind-the-scenes movement to try and build any bipartisan support, something that could pass both houses?
Yeah, there is. I mean, if you listen to what the administration is saying, they're talking about more enforcement along the border, which is definitely needed. And then other folks on the Democratic side are talking about being sure that the DACA young people who came here, with their parents through no fault of their own, are given some certainty. Those deadlines are coming up. There's also the folks who are here under what's called TPS, temporary protected status. There's a strong urge on the Democratic side to deal with that issue because, again, some deadlines are coming up where people don't know whether they can stay here with work permits. So there is an opportunity here for a trade.
That deal kind of came and went. You really think it's resurfacing?
I do think, because it's very much out there. Yesterday I did hear from some Democratic colleagues about their concern about, again, deadlines coming up for those people who are here in uncertain status, including these young people, but also the folks who are from about 10 countries around the world where there's a lot of strife, where they've come here under temporary protected status. So I think there's an opportunity to move forward. It may not be
the last time that deal surfaced, it was the president who shot it down. Have you spoken with the administration? Would they be on board with something if there were different levels of border security spending? I'm confident that they would. Recall that we're heading into September before long here, and when we get to September, we're right back into this funding issue. So we've got to come up with a longer-term strategy for the border. At the same time, there's a strong interest in the Democratic side to handle some of these other issues, and on the Republican side as well. So I think there's a basis for something, and my hope is that part of that will be dealing with this issue we talked about earlier, which is an incentive for families to come to the United States. Okay. Senator, let's talk also about what we've seen in China. Markets were up pretty sharply yesterday after we saw some of the best manufacturing numbers that we've seen in China in more than 9 months, maybe suggesting that their economy had bottomed out. We've talked a lot about how our markets have not been down nearly as much as China's markets during these trade talks between the two of them, how our economy has been much stronger than their economy. Clearly, they haven't gotten out of the woods yet. You may not be talking about the economy really picking up, but if it has bottomed out, does that change the dynamic at all in terms of our trade talks with them? Or is there still a lot of urgency to go ahead and get some sort of a trade agreement done between the United States and China?
Oh, I think there's plenty of urgency. Their economy, first of all, is not as strong as they would like it to be, and that's really the point. They're not creating the jobs they need to be able to bring people into their urban areas, and this is a concern that they've had. But second, we have something on track here that looks pretty positive. I mean, if you look at what happened just in the last couple of days, they have agreed to buy some more soybeans, which for Ohio, that's a big deal. They've also agreed, and they did that unilaterally, in other words, without getting any concession from us, they also agreed just yesterday to finally put on the controlled substances list all the analogs, all of the synthetic opioids that are similar to fentanyl, including fentanyl, which is something we've been calling for a long time. That takes away a sticking point between us. That's very important, particularly for states like mine. Ohio has been slammed with these fentanyl imports coming from China. So I see some positive signs. The Vice Premier's here today. As you know, he's coming to Washington, Premier Liu. We just had a report back from Secretary Mnuchin and Lighthizer, the USTR, who were over in China. They're talking about, making progress on these big issues like tech transfer, protecting intellectual property, and dealing with the subsidy issue, including state-owned enterprises. So I think there's a deal to be made here, and I think it's going to be in the interest of both countries to get this resolved as quickly as possible.
Senator, earlier this morning, we were speaking with Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers. She's the ranking member on the committee in the House that does oversight for internet privacy. We talked with her about what she thinks about Mark Zuckerberg's idea that, sure, he's now calling for regulation when it comes to internet data, internet privacy. Where do you think that stands? What would you like to see happen when it comes to regulating the internet?
Well, I think the tech companies have changed their minds, haven't they? And they've done so because individual states, including California, put in place their own privacy standards. And as that California standard starts to be implemented, I think you'll see even more interest among those companies in having a national standard that would preempt the individual state standards. I think there are about 13 states that have done something or are in the process of doing it. So it's a different ballgame now. It's a tough issue because there aren't a lot of guidelines as to how you would do it. But I think there's now kind of a consensus among Republicans and Democrats and significantly the tech community that something needs to be done at the national level to provide some standards. So Commerce Department's working on something. Chairman Wicker's been talking about it. I don't know exactly what's going to be the substance of it, but I do think there's a much better prospect of it happening now.
Senator, I'm thinking about jumping on the Mets bandwagon.
Well, you know what? Crystal meth is coming in to Ohio now instead of some of the other opioids, including heroin, because we've done a better job on the
New York Mets.
On the bad stuff. Oh, I thought you said meth.
No, God.
I was worried about you, Joe.
On the issues.
I was worried about you. Hey, the Reds opening day was awesome.
The Reds have the same record as last year again, 333.
It's 1-1.
1-2.
Oh, 1-2 now. Yeah. Well, listen, you should have been there opening day. You could have been the marshal in the parade.
Thanks for the invite. No, but what I'm really doing. Everybody in my ear, when I said I'm going to be a Mets fan, they screamed no, because they think that
you have the Kerning curse. We all know it. Any team you root for loses.
That's not always true.
Nobody wants to be associated with it.
It's not always true.
The Reds have better pitching. They got two great new outfielders.
I'm going to jump on the Mets bandwagon.
When you jumped on the Sixers bandwagon, they
doing great.
Lost.
No, they didn't. Sixers are doing great. Milwaukee.
They were until you became a fan.
Thank you.
Don't give up on your hometown
Rangers.
Reds. They're coming back. They're coming back.
It doesn't look a lot different from last year so far.
Better pitching, two great new outfielders. Joey Votto MVP here. We'll see.
All right, we'll see. Coming up, I'm going to give